The real sort of point here is the absolute need to talk about change in a sort of temporal focus. And there's two things that we found can be very helpful to get people to get behind policy change, and again to sort of deepen that sense of collective responsibility, right? That we all sort of share a role in doing something about this. So we've talked about this. The sea is unchanging is something that you're up against. It's immune to change. There's nothing we can do. We can't alter it. And importantly, we have not altered it. So those are two things that you're up against, and there's nothing to be done. And what this does is it absolutely obscures the role of human activity, both for good and for bad, on the ocean. And again, the idea that connected is the idea that the ocean is self-governing, that it's natural forces. Again, we can't affect it. It's the same problem. That we had a really interesting conversation in our group about the idea of the interventions that you all are advocating for are really there to help the ocean heal itself in some ways. But you can't just say the ocean will heal itself. The sort of role of the interventions and the policy decisions are really important when you're talking about this. Because again, it makes the intervention itself difficult to think if you can't see that role. So I put up that slide about the you say, they think moment. And I think that Mickey and I sometimes have that fear in this research because we are communicating solutions is so important, but sometimes we hear that, well, you're painting too rosy of a picture of what is going on. And that is absolutely not what we're saying. You shouldn't, mince words about the scope of the threat that we are facing. The important thing is you do two things. So there has to be a point in your story where you're communicating past and ongoing harms. The two things that we found to be effective when you're doing that is you have to be absolutely explicit about the role of human activity in making those harms. So you see in the before, we are facing an ocean crisis. Unprecedented changes we are seeing in ocean activity should be a stark wake-up call to all of us. So you could just even think about the structure of that sentence. We're seeing them, but we're just witnessing, right? We have had no role in that happening. But again, you can say the ocean used to be healthy, but its health has deteriorated over time because of human activity. And you can think of lots of ways that you might talk about it, but it is really very important that you show what have we done to the ocean and how has it been harmed by that activity. Because if not, people don't think that it's been harmed, and again, they also it doesn't open a space for human activity actually making a difference in what has happened. And the second thing, and again, it's that there is a way that you need to communicate harms without relying on crisis frames. When I say crisis frames, again, you might even use the word crisis. It's just stopping there. So it's the difference of me saying fire, or me saying the way that our building codes are such that we're in a fire right now. We need to do something right now and act on it and address the fire, and then moving forward, we can think about how our cities are set up to make us less vulnerable. So there's more of an explanatory component in a frame that communicates harms that doesn't just rely on crisis and scaring people to again, they cannot act. As you are communicating past harms, your communication should also be future focused. What do you want it to look like? What it could look like? What do we want tomorrow to bring? And there's really two ways that we suggest to do this. So one of the things that we tested for in this particular body of research is the role of values in communications. And when I say values, I mean those big ideas of why this matters, what we believe, what we think should happen. And so I know that a lot, I'm thinking of you who works with the scientists, and you're a science communicator, and you know, I'm a scientist as well, but scientific authority, this matters because science says so, is a values frame, right? That is not value neutral. That scientific authority is why we should pay attention and why this matters. Another value that we tested was the idea of stewardship. So again, we're not saying use this word, but it's the idea that we don't own the ocean, that we need to leave it in better shape than we had it. We sort of owe something to future generations to make this better. And this very similar experimental setup. So you guys right here pretend you are really lovely people, again, who regularly engage in research. This is an online experimental survey, so there was the question of sort of testing in different mediums that I think you had earlier today. So you guys get onto your computers, you're online, and you're going to get a message about science says so, scientific authority. And you guys here, you're going to get a message, and there's much more of you, right? Because there's thousands of people in this, but you guys are going to get a message of stewardship. And you guys right here, you get nothing. But you're our most important group because we're measuring everybody else's responses against yours. Then we're asking you a number of questions that measure your support for policies that reduce pollution and policies that make fishing more sustainable. And here is what we found. That the scientific authority value was not statistically significant. So what this means, it is like you have said nothing. The stewardship value gets you a lot more for building public support. Now, again, I know that when you work with researchers, again, I'm one of them, they will say, well, am I not telling the truth? And it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And framing it as this is just the data or this is just science is as much of a frame as any other. And it's going to have effects, and in this particular case, it has no effect. So here it is, that we have a responsibility to take care of the natural environment for future generations. We want to pass on the planet in good condition. Being good stewards of the environment means taking better care of the ocean. And again, this is not your message, right? This is just the concept that we saw do some pretty good things in public thinking. And it is a way to turn to the future. Really, I didn't include this particular slide, but really interesting, we also tested the value of fairness across generations, which actually had a backfire effect. Meaning instead of the no effect at the scientific authority, it actually, sort of like my child mental health example that I gave you earlier, it depressed support for those policy solutions. And what we sort of hypothesized was happening, or how we interpreted that particular finding, was that it was setting up an us versus them to generations, and that was having some effects that weren't good. Stewardship is sort of all of us are responsible kind of message, yeah.
So in your value of stewardship sort of sentencing example, you talk about passing the planet on in a better condition to those who follow us. Sorry, I don't understand how that's different to
it's not saying it is not
generational stuff.
Generational fairness. Okay. So it is not fair that we would do that, rather than it is our responsibility to pass on. Now, it's subtle, right? I mean, sometimes these effects are, but you guys can see in the report, it backfired when this is not fair that we're doing this. And again, Nikki has said this a number of times, and we can't sort of emphasize this enough. It's not that we expect you guys to go out in the world like this is about stewardship, sort of repeating robotically those words, but it's flexible, right? So you can sort of have a more moderate tone, and so we have responsibility, and again, you can dial it up. You can be more sort of radical if you want to, in that, we're failing to live up to a fundamental duty of care. We need to act now to save the future. So there's lots of, not only the words, but the sort of tone. Stewardship sort of gives you those options. To the extent that you can, you name the responsible actors. and that again, this is the frame around your message, and we're assuming that what you want to put in there may be some, individual behavior change, but also policy solutions. So, it's a collective we, and then here are the actions we can take, and here's how it's going to happen. X needs to happen. You need to go and talk to your whoever. So this isn't the whole message. It's saying we have a responsibility, and then really sort of getting into what that responsibility means, what it looks like, and pointing people to bigger policy solutions than what they're thinking and what many are already doing. We have the plastics bans. People are being great about, well, that's a policy solution, but people they know what they need to do at the level of individual behavior change. But we need bigger things to happen, especially in the reduction of fossil fuels. Yeah. This part of it isn't rocket science. It's just to make sure that you're always sort of, what are the steps we can take? And the thing is that we're not seeing that as much in communications as we'd like. So I'm repeating myself, but the actions we can take today can revive the ocean's health tomorrow and into the future. Pointing to that. As much as you're talking about the problem and negativity, there is something we can do in the future is important.